Hi, I'm Bill Pickens. I'm from New York City. I was born in 1936. I'm facing my 82nd birthday, and I grew up in Brooklyn, on the streets of Brooklyn with all my childhood friends. And I had an interesting neighbor when I was a child named Jackie Robinson, the very first African-American baseball player in the National League. And my dad, who was a lawyer from Fordham Law School, died at the age of 54, much too young. My mother was a teacher and a model. I went on to the University of Vermont, and there I majored in history and political science and was president of the student body, president of the Senior Men's Honor Society, and president of my fraternity, and these were all firsts at the university. I was always glad that I wasn't going to be the last. After that, I was in ROTC while I was at the university, and I loved that very much. I helped lead the drill team to several our Air Force ROTC winnings and awards in New England. And my friend, General Powell, who headed up his group in ROTC in the Army at City College, we were competitors and friends. He loved the military. I tolerated it. My brother had fought in Korea just as a 19-year-old. As a matter of fact, my family has fought in most of the wars in America. The Revolutionary War, the Civil War. I had 12 members of my family who fought in the Civil War on the Union side. In World War I had an uncle who became a major in World War I. My Aunt Harriet Ida Pickens, who graduated from Smith College and Columbia University, was the first African-American Navy officer. She was a wave officer on October 10th, 1944. And it made history. We were very proud of that. And Eleanor Roosevelt was part of the team that encouraged her to do that. I did my service in the Air Force, in the 5th Air Force, in Itazuki, Japan. And I stayed there for almost 3 years, serving our nation, serving our democracy. And there I studied Japanese language and got very good at it, and got a black belt in karate. And I thought going back to Brooklyn, that'd be a nice thing to have under your belt. But I did serve 3 years. I was the first lieutenant in the 1955th AEC squad, which handled all the radar approach controls for the F-100s and the F-102s, which we had at our base. As a matter of fact, I spent New Year's Eve in Tokyo of 1958. And then I took a train south to Itazuki Air Base in the city of Fukuoka, which is a southern city with palm trees, southwest Japan. It sits right across from Korea and below Hiroshima and about 80 miles from Nagasaki. So I was between where the A-bombs hit. I arrived in Japan as a young guy. I was 22 years old. And I had this major from Alabama who was my commander. I got on the air base, got housing, and he said to me, he says, well, Bill, he says, listen, you're new lieutenant. He says, I want you to go out and live with the Japanese and learn how to talk to these folks. And I said, yes, sir. But anyway, I was able to converse in Japanese during my tenure in Japan. And that helped me in good stead the rest of my life. We had a very good relationship with the Japanese then. We were watching the communist threat. Vladivostok, Russia, is right across from Hokkaido, Japan. So, and then you had North Korea, and you had China. So there was this threat of communism spreading throughout the Far East, and we were the bulwark against that. But they needed a lot of money to reconstruct, and they did. And they wound up building one of the best railroad systems in the world.
This is Japan's answer to some of her railway ills, a high-speed train going into service on the Tokyo-Osaka run.
And I would go on TDY to Tokyo, to the airbase Fuchu up there, and Yokota and Yokosuka, the Navy station, delivering payrolls and so forth. I was chief of administration for my commander, and we were staying fit and ready. You know, we were combat ready. And I was getting ready for the subways of New York with my karate. I said, you know, if somebody tries to take my seat, I'll be ready. So, a lot of the old officers were the colonels and the majors. They were Southern guys, Alabama, Mississippi. I say my boss, my commander, was from Alabama, and we had a mission. There wasn't time for vicious racism because we had our eye on Korea and Russia and China. That was and so our mission commitment kind of made any racist thoughts put them under the cover, as it were, because our mission was more important. Saving America was more important than saving face, you know. So, but there were some incidents. I mean, we were not absolved of racial incidents in Japan because some of the young guys would get drunk and do things to Japanese women that were untoward, and you know, here came the MPs and the APs to smash in and take care of business. But it was not a racial cauldron by any means. And I made some lifelong friends in the military who were from the South. I don't think they'd seen black people like me before, who'd been educated in New York and New England. And my grandfather was one of the founders of the NAACP, so we knew about race relations quite substantially. He was the youngest member of the Niagara movement, which founded the NAACP in 1905 to 1909. He himself had graduated from Yale near the top of his class in 1904. So he wasn't to be trifled with either. I was out of the military. I went in the reserves and became a captain in the reserves. And I became a temporary major and a full captain in the U.S. Air Force, which I still am today. I joined the Western Electric Company and went through their management training program as one of the first African Americans they had ever hired for that. Then I was recruited by a firm called Booz Allen and Hamilton, which was a major worldwide consulting firm. See, then I became a vice president of a bank. I think that was also a first. Finally, I worked for Philip Morris, which was my last corporate job. I didn't smoke, which made it kind of awkward, but the most amazing thing was that Joseph Cullman, who was the chairman of Philip Morris, his dad and my granddad were classmates at Yale in class of 1904. He was greatly amused by that and probably shocked. And then in 1979, started my own firm. I'd learned enough, I'd worked for a lot of other people, and I decided, well, you know, Pickens, you know, we've learned a lot, start your own business. And I did. And for 25 years, I headed up my own company, which did management consulting work around the world, and which was great fun. I worked in Morocco and South Africa and Europe and Asia. And along the way, of course, I got married to a wonderful lady whom I lost 3 years ago, tragically, to cancer, my beloved Pat Brannon, whom I met here in Sag Harbor. I ran into her on the beach and was love at first sight. So we got married and had 3 children. And our children, we have a daughter and 2 sons. They're all college people, and I'm very proud of them. I would guess you'd say I'm an amateur historian, but I'm an historian. I mean, I believe in history. I read a lot of books. I do a lot of research and give lectures and write papers on history, on historical moments. My family's been steeped in history because we've been in America since 1670. Half my family has been free for more than 300 years. and half were enslaved. My father's family came from enslavement. My mother's family from freedom, and freedom brought great fruits. You could own property, you could get work, you could get educated, and you could travel. That's what freedom brought. Enslavement, you were shackled, monitored, and punished. There are lessons in history, and I advise all those fellow Americans to understand their history. You cannot be ignorant of what happened in this country. We've been half free and half slave a long, long time. And my grandfather fought mightily from Yale to jail. I think young men, especially, profit by service in the military. It just doesn't show love of country. It shows that you're going to be a responsible man. You're going to learn some skills. Service to the country, I think, makes you a better citizen. The military is a training ground, a learning ground, and I'm all for it. I think it prepares, especially, again, young men for a good future. And I think we have to look at the draft situation again and see whether or not that would be an important return to making us better Americans, making us better citizens. You can't, the 1% who defend us all, that's a burden. That's not fair. And America's supposed to be fair and just. So I would advocate, if I were in politics, a return to some more equitable distribution of military service and the burden of that and the glory of it, too. But, we got to share and share alike. We all have to protect this society.